We talked about this last night. Filipino scientists saying there might be ongoing artificial island building in the Pag-asa Cays, which are close to Pag-asa Island in the West Philippine Sea. Now, to help us understand this further, we have with us live in the studio Professor Jonathan Anticamara of the Institute of Biology in UP Diliman. Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, po.
The last time that we saw each other was before the Marine Research Assessment.
Yeah.
I think that was before days 1 and 2. And I remember in day 1, there was already a helicopter flying around us. But in day 2, it was so low that it hurt some of your team. Can we get your story, your side of the story on what happened there?
So on that specific day 2 survey, when the helicopter of China actually flew lower than usual, we were actually underwater. My team and I were underwater, but the NHK crew and the BFAR team were also flying drones and then underwater drones. So they were the ones that were hurt at that point. But me and the team were actually safe because we were underwater. But when we get up of like from the diving, the boatman, everybody told us that we have to abort.
And there were underwater sounds, am I correct?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you hear?
Yeah, so my team and I heard this kind of constant beeping sound, and we cannot identify it because I've been diving for many, many years, and my team and I just cannot locate where is this from, and none of our equipment
was it so painful that you'd have to
it wasn't
get out?
painful, but it was uncomfortable because I was thinking maybe what's going on is that a computer or something was wrong, and then one of the dive team member was hurt. So I was just looking around and like keep for like eyeing for something like strange or
But the sound
unusual.
the sound, Professor, was not coming from any of your co-divers.
Yeah, so it's I asked my my team members, and it's not from any of our equipment.
But
so
it was
we don't-
loud, Professor?
It's loud enough. You can hear it. You can hear it from
So
the
it was
videos.
bothering you whilst you were underwater?
Well, it's not painful. It's not bothering, but because when you hear something like this that's
Strange.
unusual,
Strange.
yeah, you have to worry.
Did you
Like,
get
unusual.
yeah,
enough time though to be able to assess? Kasi noong unang day parang Sandy K2 and ano ba yung
Sunday K2 and then Sunday K1.
1 and then the second day was 3 and 4.
4, yes.
Did you get enough time on the second day?
Yeah, we actually finished the survey, but when the time we need to basically reel the transect tapes, I was kind of worried that we don't have enough time because I was thinking about this beeping sound and then the low air that we have left, and then thinking that maybe if some of the dive equipment is not malfunctioning. So I instructed my team member to actually just leave some of the equipments underwater, and was hoping that we can go back up and then have another dive. But when we got off, I was told that we have to abort. So because that day actually it was more calm. When we went down underwater, the helicopter was not flying as frequently around us compared to day 1. So and then the Chinese Coast Guard also did not bother us that much.
So
It
walang
stopped.
media masyado kayong kasama
Oh,
nung time
it
na
stopped
yun?
immediately. It kind of tried intercepting us several times, but then it stopped.
This was
So,
on day 2.
On day 2. So I thought it was a calmer day, but turned out no, because the helicopter actually, it was actually a more difficult day, turned out, because the helicopter went down lower.
Let's talk about the research, Professor. I know last month you guys said that you needed more time to assess the samples that you collected. We already know about the piles and piles of coral, which we could see through the video. We're interested in what did your findings, based on the samples you collected, really told you.
Well, the samples actually is just an additional information, but it's really just for us to identify the species that are in there. But it's not too important, I think, in terms of the entire story. What we saw from underwater in the videos we took, the fact that the pile of rubble was very high compared to anything that can be formed by natural force, like a wave, a storm, or anything. And the fact that these rubbles are so white compared to any other rubble underwater that's natural from underwater, suggests that already that this is not from underwater. So it cannot be formed by any natural force gathering rubble from underwater and then piling them up. So it's kind of from somewhere else, right? And then
Hindi sa taas, tsaka yung nasa baba.
It's,
that's been
it's different.
established.
Yeah, it's very
Different
different.
species. So their tests confirmed your initial theory?
I think it's difficult to at the species level. But what we found is that many of these fragments or coral rubble. So when the coral die, they leave the skeleton, right? So it's like broken pieces of stone that Filipinos often called bato, stone, but actually these are animals, so it's just the skeleton. And when we look at the species, what we found is that most of the species that are underwater are either the shape of our head or a fist, something like that. It's kind of massive coral, submassive. But many of the coral rubble in the pile are branching. So even that, they already are very distinct, right? And then on some sides, the coral underwater that's still alive are shaped like a folius or a rose, but the ones on the rubble are all branching. So there's really a strong distinction between the corals in the rubble and then what's underwater. So that's the main thing. And then the other thing is that I don't know, you went on the island itself? No, you were on the boat most of the time.
I was
think.
in the Sandy Cays 2.
Yeah, so you were there. And you saw the one, if you walk on the middle of the Sandy Cays 2, there are piles of big rubble in the middle, but none of them are on the edges of the...
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
I didn't see the difference.
Yeah, so it's, for me, that's also a telling sign. It's difficult for those bigger rubble to cross from the edges, get into the middle.
Because of the weight.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're on top.
Yeah, and then suddenly they're in the middle. So it's like, how can they get there? Like,
Wait,
from
what's
wind?
the significance, Prof, of the whiter coral? It means they've been sitting out in the sun for longer? What does that mean?
When the corals are too white, that means that probably they have been dead and they're out of water for some time. So they're so white, there's no algae on them, and most of the white corals are either from the bottom of the ocean or they haven't seen an algae for a while. And I think that because these rubble are so white that no algae is covering them, that it might be recently dumped. So maybe if there's an ongoing piling of corals, maybe this is a continuous event. That's why what we see are very white. Otherwise, they will be, if they've been there for some time, they will also be covered
Is
in
it
algae.
possible that it's composed of dead corals from Subi Reef that drifted to the Cays? Because that was the argument back, I think, in 2017.
Yeah, but I was thinking the other way, because when we look at the formations, Sandy Cays 1, which is closer to Pag-asa, has a larger formation but mostly sand. Sandy Cays 2 and Sandy Cays 3, mostly rubble. But Sandy Cays 4, which is closer to Subi Reef, actually do not have this pile of rubble that's quite
strange.
big. So no, if it's from if it's
Dapat
from
mauna
Subi,
doon.
dapat
If it was naturally carried there,
from-
then
from
dapat
the
sa
current-
4 meron.
Yeah,
diba?
yeah. It should be there also, and it's very prominent, but it's not. So it might not be.
Professor, one thing that stood out to me was that you said it's degrading. The marine life, biodiversity, and all of that is degrading. Could the dumping of the bleached dead coral on top of the live coral, could that cause the live coral to like choke and die?
Yeah, definitely for those coral that are impacted by the piling of the rubble, you can see that many of these large corals, I think that some of them could be hundreds years old. And now some of them are completely covered, or maybe half of their body or half of their colony now covered in rubble. So I think that those are the main direct impacts of the piling of rubble on top of the live corals. But I think that the overall degradation of Pag-asa and the Pag-asa Cays are not just due to the piling of rubble, that's one for sure. But then there are other things, I think, like it's ongoing disturbances such as climate. Because I can see underwater like 7 meters to 15 meters down deep in the cays that there are many corals that used to be alive. They're big colonies, but now they're dead and completely covered in algae. And they're not blasted or anything with dynamite or anything. They're still perfectly intact.
In
but
short,
they're
they
dying.
look
So-
like they died a natural death.
Yeah, and it could be like a warming event or some kind of... But also the thing is that it's a complex thing because the reef, supposedly, when it's healthy, there will be many fish that would eat the algae and therefore maintain the healthy reef. But in this case, there's not a lot of fish. So even those fish also now are not contributing to the control of the algae. So there are many, as I said, there are many layers that are contributing to the overall degradation of, and it could be overfishing, it could be partly the climate change that for sure we are experiencing, like all this super warm weather.
Overfishing by, is it by the maritime militia vessels around?
It could be a
There
long,
was a swarm there.
yeah, for sure that we don't know the actual fishing
I
activity.
mean, kahit presence lang nila, does it affect the ecosystem because of the oil, the waste?
It could possibly be, and you notice that in places where there are a lot of Chinese vessels, even in Masinloc, that you can find lots of bags of garbage that are that have Chinese characters, right? So that means that pollution is also intense when you have all this swarming of, because where do they throw away the garbage, right? But I think that in terms of the death of the coral, something like that might be too localized. But the fact that this is kind of across all the Cays and Pag-asa, there must be something a little bit stronger than just the pollution, because sometimes pollution are too localized.
Yeah.
So it could be like a climate thing, and then the overfishing, definitely. I think the overfishing must have been ongoing for a long time, and for sure we cannot eliminate the fact that in there, what we saw, the only fishing vessels in there, or vessels, we don't even know if they're fishing, because there are so many different kinds of the Chinese militia vessels. But at nighttime, you can see these super lights. And sometimes super lights are known to be some kind of a fish attracting lights. So there might be some, but it's very difficult, because you know that every time we move in Pag-asa, then these Chinese vessels will kind of intercept or interrupt us. So it's really
But I
difficult
mean,
to...
scientifically, at least, it's hard to make that conclusion that it is because of China, because after all, it's a number of factors. Right?
Yeah.
But
You
in
cannot
terms
pinpoint.
of specifically artificial island building, which NST ADG Malaya is already jumping to. He said that perhaps there is a plan there. There's intent to turn that into a low tide elevation, thereby reversing the 2016 arbitral ruling. Apart from the piles of rubble, what other evidence did we see of artificial island building potentially whilst we were there?
Apart from that, I think there is none, but the fact that when we look at satellite map, that there are already so many islands built by China, right? And many of these are too close already, and within the EEZ, then also there are many reports that we can read, we can search online, that the amount of island building that China is doing is so high, like a tune of million of square meters in 3 years' time, something like that, based on some of these reports. And then also the fact, I think that many of these islands now, supposedly like the K1s, they keep saying that China, that this is naturally formed. But when in fact, when we look at it, it seems like it's not naturally formed. So there are a lot of suspicious things, like in terms of what they're saying and in terms of we can see. So we don't really know sometimes the entire story, because all we really need is a picture of if it was China doing that, the picture of them dumping,
yung
but
corals,
we don't
I
have that.
remember we were also trying to identify where they come from. Have you seen those corals in other places? For example, yung dead corals, ginagamit ba talaga yun sa island reclamation? The corals underneath, I think we were also, that's why we got samples, right? To be able to identify at least
Well,
where they belong.
well, the samples is really just to identify what sort of species. And because what we did when we went underwater, we also kind of photographed all the species that we found. Right? So kind of to match the corals on the pile of rubble and then the corals that we see underwater.
Pero yung corals sa taas, ginagamit ba yun for reclamation activities? Would you know?
The corals sa taas were...
Yung dumped corals.
Dead corals.
Yeah, I think so, because when there's I'd look at a few publications by the Chinese Academy of Science talking about the reclamation that they did in Kalayaan Island Group, and they even pointed the map of where they did it, and it's called hydraulic kind of reclamation. And when you look at this process and the images they show, it's kind of like that. There's layers of sand and rubble. So I think there's already a technology that they did, and they already published that. So they know the technology of how they built. And they already published that online, right, in journals, how they built islands in the So we kind of know the details of what are the components of island building in terms of coral, sand, etc., and the various
Professor
layers.
Joel,
Yeah.
we were so excited to
Yeah.
hear that this marine research trip was going
Yeah.
to happen. As far as we know, it is the most publicized one, of course. It's the first one that I've heard of that we're serious. First of all, like, was this the first actual trip that you guys and you and your team specifically from the UP Marine Biology Institute, was it the first trip that you made out there? And also, what was the marching order to you guys? Like, what did they tell you was the point of all this research, and what were you supposed to look out for?
So the brief was to really look at the marine resources, right? But also to look at the piles of the rubble, because they already have some ideas that there seems to be a growth in the pile of rubble. But so there are two components in the research. And before I started the research, I looked at what's been published. And as I said earlier, I've done national surveys of reefs in the Philippines, and most of my publications are national status of reefs. So I go around the Philippines using standard methods of how to assess coral reefs, except the West Philippine Sea. I haven't been there because it's not easy to
It's not
get
easy to
access.
get, yeah.
So I was excited to when I was told that I can join the BFAR team to go there and say, for me, I map all the corals and fish in the Philippines, but I haven't been to this space. Of course, I wouldn't say no, right? But when and there was no any other publication in terms of what species of corals are found in this area, what species of fish are found. So for me, that's all exciting. So that's why I joined and that's what we did. We basically just photograph and document what sort of species underwater, how many of them, what are their sizes, per unit area. So a standardized transect, the way we survey things underwater. And then look at basically just visually look at the pile of rubble. That's all we did, basically,
So now
for this
that
very
you've-
short research. Yeah, it's a very short-term
Very
research.
short trip, too.
Now,
Yeah.
now that you've seen it, are you disappointed?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because my expectation, I told Rich before when we were there that because this is offshore, away from many Filipinos, many Filipino fishers. If you go to Philippine coastal areas like Subic or Masinloc or Batangas, there's hundreds, thousands of fishing boats. So the reefs are really under stress in Bohol, in Cebu, anywhere. But this place, Pag-asa, only have about 20 boats. So when I look at from the airplane, wow, there's not a lot of fishing here going. So I thought that
It
the
would be
reef
more
will be
pristine.
healthier, that the fish will be
Richer.
bigger.
So the conditions there
But it's not.
disappointed you as a marine biologist.
Yeah,
basically.
because I was expecting a bit more. Like I would see bigger fish and hopefully
How would
sharks.
it compare to, like, for example, another area that you have surveyed underwater? Would you say the same degradation was observed there, minus perhaps those dumping of dead corals?
Yeah,
May mga ganun din.
Yeah, definitely all throughout the Philippines. Like right now, I go during weekends to Zambales, some of these areas, Batangas and Hundred Islands and Bolinao. And many of these areas that I go to are some of the oldest protected areas in the Philippines, right? So we can find it here in Luzon, the oldest marine protected areas. But even these marine protected areas, although they are well protected, some of the corals are dying from climate, combination of
climate
climate, from sedimentation. So I think that all throughout the Philippines, this large-scale disturbances are impacting the reefs. And yeah,
Is
so
there another trip that's in store for your team? Because I believe we're also building a case, an environmental case, to strengthen our claims in our territory.
well, there might be, and I've been recommending that there should be a systematic monitoring and
Right.
survey of not just this one-time study. It should be a kind of a long-term monitoring so that we can have good data
Yes.
about what's going on here and what's the status of the
Are you going to
biodiversity.
publish a paper on the findings of this
Yeah,
trip?
so I'm trying to finish the report in about the end of the month.
Wow,
so,
that's
but I still have
that's a
a
really
lot.
quick
I still have a
deadline.
lot of like analysis to finish. Some of the more difficult ones are the identification of some of the corals because
Right.
corals are very.
Could you
so it
put
takes a bit time.
remote equipment there so that you guys don't have to keep going back? Because as you said, access is hard. Sometimes you get harassed. Possibly that beeping sound could be some sort of underground
the
monitoring.
Sonar equipment.
Something like that, maybe underwater camera, something.
That would be one possible thing to do. But sometimes, when you're, for me at least, because I do most of my surveys by myself, not using a robot or any other technology. I think that for me, my brain can process well when really I observe and I look at what's underwater.
Yep.
But maybe processing a video sometimes might be too different from you actually
Yeah.
experiencing underwater.
It's
Really
quite different.
experiencing the
You
entire
gotta see it for yourself.
three-dimensional
Yeah.
like events underwater. It's different, I think. But I think in this case, maybe what you're suggesting is probably one of the best way to do monitoring for safety purposes.
Well, we had you here today because you have an important story to tell.
Thank you.
And we know it is an ongoing story
Yeah,
that
and-
we need to hear about more.
And we hope that this research result would actually tell the Filipinos that we need to manage, monitor, and
Yeah.
recover some of our reefs that are not experiencing degradation. I think that's the priority for me.
Loud and clear,
Yeah.
Prof.
We're also glad you're safe, well and safe.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you too. See you over there.
Well, thank you so much for coming to the big story, Professor Jonathan Anticamara of the Institute of Biology in UP Diliman.
Okay.